That happens all the time, and examiners are now saying, you've not answered the question, this is a pre-learned essay, 3 out of 25. The biggest problem with paper 2 responses is that they don't really answer the question. That is a 1 hour 45-minute examination at the end of the course. You must avoid pre-learning responses based on the 2 literary work. Take some time, take 20 minutes, 25 minutes to really think. You have to have a deep, thorough understanding of those works of literature. You can't really pre-learn things. You can't rote learn for that exam. Hi there, and welcome to Sparkl's Writing for Success in English Paper 2. This is for the IB Diploma English A Language and Literature course. In case you missed the previous offering, this was on Paper 1, and you can find that on Sparkl's YouTube channel. Today we're going to build upon some of those ideas, but look at one of the other assessment components, the other examined assessment that comes at the end of the program, and that is Paper 2, the comparative essay. So this podcast, what can we expect? We're going to reiterate what we spoke about last time, about how IB English differs from traditional study perhaps, a reminder of the assessment overview as well. We're going to look in detail at Paper 2. All you need to know about how to succeed in Paper 2 will be covered over the next 25 minutes or so. And we'll try and reiterate the key skills that IB English develops and assesses, i.e., not only how do I do well in this examination, but also what other skills am I learning that will benefit me in higher education and in life as well. If we go back to this course as a whole, before we get deep into Paper 2, in our previous podcast on the Sparkl YouTube channel, you will find a discussion of how the course is very much exploring global issues through the study of literary and non-literary texts. It's very much a course about global issues. And in doing that, students succeed when they follow a path of guided inquiry. It's not just information to learn and receive and repeat, but it's exploring, it's asking questions, it's examining evidence through literature and non-literature, questioning, discussion, investigation. Students record their learning through the learner portfolio. So you guys listening, you're going to keep your learner portfolio as you go, and basically reflect on those insights. And us as teachers, we help to guide you to that end. You're learning about ideas and about global perspectives, learning about the world as a whole, how different people from different places and different backgrounds might have different perspectives. And of course, you're really learning that close analytical skill to develop precise analytical, interpretive, and deconstructive skills. So when we're talking about these big global ideas, we're looking at it through literature and analysing the tools of the literary author or the non-literary author, and how do they create meaning, effect, and impact. Okay, so that's the course as a whole. Last time we talked about assessment, and it's important to understand how the different assessment components add up. We talked about Paper 1 last time, which is worth 35% of the final grade in both higher level and standard level. Paper 2 is worth 25% of the final grade for both higher level and standard level as well. Okay, so a quarter of your overall marks are on this examination that is a 1 hour 45-minute examination at the end of the course. Where students go in and they have 4 questions in the exam, and you have to answer one of those 4 questions in full essay format. Then it's assessed, and it's worth a quarter of the final marks. So what is Paper 2? Well, it's a comparative essay. It's a piece of literary analysis. Students must write at length, answering what I'd call an outward-looking conceptual question with reference to 2 literary works studied. So let's unpack that for a second. At higher level, students study a total of 6 literary works. At standard level, students study 4 literary works. And 2 of those works are going to be used for that final essay. The students can choose which ones, but they're going to be used, and they can't be used for any other assessment component. So when they go into that exam, you're going to be answering one of the 4 questions. You don't know what those questions are going to be, and you're going to be referring to 2 literary works you've studied. Now, I suppose it stands to reason that if you don't know the questions, you don't know which works are suitable. So students are going to have to prepare 2 or 3, or 3, I would argue, as a minimum, literary works for that exam, so that you can choose the 2 that are more suitable to one of the questions. But then it's a full essay about how those literary works address that question. We'll look at what the questions look like a little bit later on. The responses should make a convincing argument in response to the question, while also ensuring meaning and message of the literary works are considered along with aspects of style and literary craft. What I've bolded there for you on the slide is content and form. It's not just the ideas, it's also the techniques that highlight the ideas and create meaning. Remember, it's not a history essay about people and events. It's a literature essay. Therefore, we're looking at aspects of literary craft. Yes, we're talking about character and plot, but we're also talking about narrative chronology, narrative perspective, setting, and then more sort of word level ideas like motifs and symbols and figurative language and other particular aspects of style that you think actually contribute to the meaning as well. Okay. The final bullet point, which is absolutely essential for this, is it has to be a comparative essay. It's actually not an essay where 2 different works are considered how they answer a question. It's how they compare and contrast with each other answering that question. And there's a big chunk of the marking criteria actually contributes to that as well. So they're the ideas. Two of the literary works, ones that haven't been used for any other assessment component, has to directly answer the question and considering content and form, and needs to be comparative. Okay, so I said we would consider what the questions look like. Well, let's have a little look at them here. These are 5 examples of recent examination questions. As I said, students receive 4 on the paper, and they choose to write about one of them, and they have an hour and 45 minutes to do so. Let's look at the questions. Explore how 2 works you have studied present characters as complex and multifaceted. Discuss how 2 works you have studied portray the concept of death. Relationships are often central to literary works. How is this true in 2 works you have studied? The depiction of historical setting is an important aspect of many works. Referring to 2 works you have studied, discuss how and to what effect this depiction is achieved. And another one, referring to 2 works you have studied, discuss how female heroism is represented by the writers. Okay, so we see three types of questions really: explore, discuss, and referring to. It's a little bit more complex than that. If you look at the 3rd and 4th question, they are what I'd call statement questions. There is a sentence and then a question that comes from the sentence, or a referring to, discuss based on that sentence. The 3rd question there is the one that students need to be careful of. Relationships are often central to literary works is the statement. How is this true? The trap there is that students often don't discuss to what extent it's true or not true. They often just accept the sentence. And in fact, in most cases, not even accepting the full sentence. So many students wrote really good essays in this particular question two or 3 years ago, and got very poor marks. And the reason was that they didn't discuss how it was true or not true, i.e. choose works that it might be to some extent true and some extent not, which is good practice. What they did was actually just write essays that said it was true, or the ones who got really poor marks, they didn't actually discuss whether it was how relationships were central to literary works. They just wrote lovely essays about relationships in literary works. And they're two different things. This isn't a question that says there are relationships in literary works, discuss. It says relationships are often central. And that's a key element of the question. Are the relationships central or are they not? And students who didn't address the idea of it being central didn't do very well. So there's sort of trap questions there, I think. If you look at question 1, often this is a challenging question because students love to talk about characters. And they often end up talking about characters like they're real people. And as a consequence, we have these great big long essays about characters being discussed like they're real people, and they don't score very well because they're not really looking at any other aspects of literary craft. We're not looking at narrative chronology, narrative perspective, setting, symbolism, motifs, figurative language, all those sorts of things. They're just talking about characters and to some extent characterization. And that often doesn't score as well. So character questions are tricky. The easier questions to write about are the discuss how questions, because it's not just asking you to talk about them, but to talk about how it happens, and therefore how the writer achieves it. So it's automatically asking for discussion of writer's craft through those literary features. So, for example, discuss how 2 works of study portray the concept of death. They're quite nice questions to answer, as long as you've prepared literary works on the concept of death. The trick being you don't know what the concept's going to be before you get to the exam. So sometimes those questions work for you, sometimes they don't. But they're quite nice questions to answer. However, we do have to remember from the previous slide, we do have to remember these 3 elements, or the bullet points 2 and 3. The answer should be about content and form, style, and it must be comparative. So even if you get a question that's perfect, if you don't do those things, you're not going to do so well. Okay. So there's some insight there into what the questions look like. The next question, I guess, is what skills and capacities is it testing? I mean, what as teachers, as future university tutors, university admissions officers, future employers, for example, what sort of skills are we asking the students of the IB to learn through this assessment? Why do we want you to learn it? Why is it important? Why is it better than receiving information and regurgitating it for an exam? Well, here you go. It's reading and understanding. And it's understanding the nature of literature and its role and function in the acquisition of knowledge. So for this particular assessment, what we're trying to do is know that not only have you read and understood a work of literature, but you've understood what it can tell us about the real world. And you can address that when you see a new question that you haven't seen before. So you're answering a question, a conceptual question about the real world, the concept of death, or how relationships play a role in life. And you're thinking, I can show that through aspects of literature that I've read, and I can apply it, and I can show what we learn about that through literature. And I can show that I can understand this novel, I can understand what the writer intended, or this play, or this collection of poetry. I can understand the techniques the writer used to create meaning, and I can then use that in a new situation. So I'm not just receiving knowledge from my teacher and repeating it for an exam, i.e. what we would call rote learning it, but I'm actually understanding something deeply so that I can reuse it in a new scenario. I can apply that knowledge to a new situation. That's such an important skill in life, and that's why it's being tested here. I can also interpret meaning. So I'm not just looking for information that is what we would say in English, I guess, black and white. I'm not just reading the lines, I'm reading between the lines and under the text. I can actually read something and I can interpret what it means. And I can justify that with reference to the actual words, but I can guess, I can understand, I can analyze, I can evaluate what the meaning is. And I can support those arguments with the evidence from the text itself. Obviously, a really important skill, I can write a structured analysis. I can write an essay. I can be given a question. I can structure a formal essay response to it, which is an important skill, whatever I go on to study in higher education. And I've mentioned it already, I can connect content and form. So I don't just talk about literature as people and events, character and plot. I understand that it's not a history essay. I understand that it's fictional writing, and I can look at how writers have created that to have an impact upon a reader or a member of an audience for a play, and therefore I can analyze that when I'm analyzing the choices. That's what the exam is trying to do. I'm going to move on now to what that looks like. Okay, so how do we do well? What does good look like, and what does not so good look like? Well, here's something, and I'll read this to you now, and I'll try to unpack it a little bit. The biggest problem with paper 2 responses is that they don't really answer the question. I have total sympathy with you as students of this exam when you want to go in there, you're nervous, you need to get a good result, and you think, I'm just going to learn something, put it in my head, have it running around my head all night, and I'm going to just repeat it in the exam room. Okay? It's a way that we try to prepare ourselves and eliminate any variable of not being able to think on the day. Let's just try and rote learn something and repeat it. You must avoid this. Your students must avoid doing this. You must avoid pre-learning responses based on the 2 literary works. It sometimes is encouraged in classrooms around the world, and it's one of the things that I try to do when I'm talking to teachers around the world, to say, don't tell your students to do this. More than ever, examiners are really, really marking harshly if they think a student has pre-learned an essay about 2 literary works and they're just trying to twist that essay to the question. So I've got this essay in my head. I know what I'm going to write every paragraph. I've got all my quotations. I've got my analysis. And then I'm just going to twist it to that question about the concept of death, even though my essay was actually about journeys or something like that. Okay, well, one of the big journeys in life is a journey to death. And now I'm going to write my essay about journeys instead of about the concept of death. That happens all the time. And examiners are now saying, you've not answered the question. This is a pre-learned essay, 3 out of 25 instead of 15 out of 25 because it's quite a good essay. Okay. It must be an authentic argument in response to the question that shows flexible understanding of the literary work studied and what they say about the issues in question or in the question. So if it's about how do writers explore the concept of death, you must, in that exam hall, take some time, take 20 minutes, 25 minutes to really think how death is presented in those works. You can't really pre-learn things. You can't rote learn for that exam. You have to have a deep, thorough understanding of those works of literature. You have to have quotations in your head that you've learned, but you have to have a deep understanding that in that time, you're actually using your brain and thinking, okay, so death in this work is presented like this. We've got this character and then this happens. And then there's that whole symbolism here. You've got the use of the mask or the darkness, the way it describes the setting or whatever it is. And that's death there. And then death in this one. And this one does it more in a more of a descriptive way. This one does it more in terms of the plot. This author seems to be talking about death as a kind of positive way for renewal. This author seems to see death very much is a dark future that they try to avoid, and so on. Compare and contrast. That's what you have to do in the exam room. You can't go into the exam room and not think. You have to think, you have to prepare, you have to plan thoroughly, and then you write that essay. So your mind can't be muddled with things you've learned. And if you don't do that, and it's hard, make no bones about that. It's really hard. But if you don't do it, then you won't do very well, because the examiners are being very harsh on this. I've mentioned there as an additional point, but it's worth remembering, the only thing where you should do some sort of rote learning before the exam is for quotations or literary features. That's where you can do that sort of exam revision, because responses that don't include explicit mention of literary features, I've mentioned them a few times: setting, narrative chronology, narrative perspective, symbolism, motifs, figurative language, blah, blah, blah. Responses that don't include those will struggle to score the best marks. So that's where you can do chanting in your head revision, but don't do it for the essays. Don't learn essays. You're going to have to think when you're in the exam hall. Okay, so there's some advice. What would a good response look like? So the biggest challenge, and therefore the key to success, lies in ensuring the response is suitably comparative. My big challenge when I'm teaching this course, when I'm teaching teachers how to teach this course, is how do we get authentic comparison? Well, I would always say good analytical paragraphs start with an author choice effect topic sentence. Okay, so Brecht uses foreshadowing supertitles in order to destroy traditional tension and allow the audience to focus upon the social message. Right? Author Brecht uses foreshadowing supertitles in order to blah, 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 blah. That's what I would say is usually a very good topic sentence. Though the problem being that's just about one play, one author, one choice, and one effect. But this needs to be comparative. We recommend discussing both works in each body paragraph, but it is harder. It is harder. I can't deny that. But we recommend both works in each body paragraph. Therefore, to do really well, the real challenge is making sure the first sentence of each paragraph connects both works to the question and an aspect of literary style, and that each paragraph should build upon the last. So to do well, the first sentence of each paragraph is really key. In an ideal world, it transitions from the previous paragraph and builds upon it. So building upon this idea of symbolism, both authors use this particular technique or this particular idea or explore this particular concept in order to address the question. So both authors use multiple narrative perspectives in order to explore their differing views on the concept of death, for example. So building upon this use of symbolism, both authors use multiple narrative perspectives in order to present their differing views on the concept of death. That would be an excellent topic sentence. It's not easy. It takes a bit of practice. Actually, once you've practiced it, you can do it as quickly as I did it there. And I was just making that up there. Once you get into that mindset, you can do that. But it takes a little bit of practice. It's not easy. But once you get there, it makes the rest of your essay much easier. So I would say that's a key bit of advice. I'm going to move on to some topic sentences for you to help you before we wrap up. Here are some effective topic sentences that students have used in exam conditions. So this actually goes back to the May 2025 session. The question was, how do two works you have studied challenge cultural values? So really a great question, actually. Many of my students didn't answer it, which was a shame, because when I looked at last year's exam paper, I would have said, wow, I'll do that question. It's such an opening to really complex and interesting and varied discussion. But many students didn't do it. Okay, a couple of students did, and they came up with some cracking topic sentences and some great essays, some level 7 essays, okay? Both authors used time-specific dramatic techniques to foreshadow the plot of their plays, challenging the value and importance of an individual's decisions by demonstrating that the protagonist's fate is predetermined. Wow. Okay. Neil, that's too hard. I can never do that. Actually, you can. Because this is a great piece of writing by a student who is smart, obviously. But you can see all of the parts of the topic sentence I just sort of modeled for you. It's both authors use some sort of technique in order to do something to address the question. Yeah? And then it starts to build. Both are time-specific dramatic techniques. Okay, so it could be dramatic techniques to do with time and the use of time, or it could be the student might be talking about things related to the time of the writing. As you'll see from the next topic sentence, which is the next paragraph of this student's essay, they were actually writing about Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet and Tennessee Williams's A Streetcar Named Desire. Two plays, one from 1593, 1598, something like that, end of the 16th century, and one from 1949, was it? Halfway through the 20th century. So time specific could be techniques that playwrights were using in Shakespeare's day versus techniques that American authors were using in the 20th century. Or it could be something to do with the use of time in the play itself. Looking at the question, I suspect it's context, the cultural values of the authors. There's another technique mentioned in there, foreshadowing, the idea of hinting at something before it happens. And then the student actually talks about what that idea is, what the concept is, what the theme is. It's an individual's decisions. How much do individuals have a say over their own lives? Of course, you know, in some belief systems, and even more historically than today, people believe that actually we don't really have choices over our own lives. Our lives are predetermined by an omnipotent force, a god of some kind. Interestingly, when we look at literature, that's always the case for our characters because the author has already determined their futures. Actors in a play have already know what their lines are at the end of the play and things like that. So there's lots of interesting literary ideas there. But the structure of that very complex topic sentence is just what we said. It's nice, it's simple, it's clear. It's those three parts. Look at the next one. It's shorter, it's a bit simpler. Expanding on the previous argument, Shakespeare and Williams also challenge the value of societal status and cultural hierarchy by using contrast to highlight societal issues. Okay, so both playwrights. Technique, contrast. Great technique in all literature, but particularly plays. Plays use a lot of contrast to keep the audience engaged. You know, a long scene followed by a short scene, a talky scene followed by a busy active scene. These sorts of things happen all the time. And why are they doing it? To challenge social status and cultural hierarchy, which obviously relates to the question. So that's it. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying writing like that is easy. But I'm saying that's how we do it to get the top marks. And actually the building blocks behind those sentences are really clear. Once we get those first sentences in place, the rest of the paragraph is just about proving it. Evidence, explanation, link back to the question. One more for you. The most significant cultural value challenged in both works is the worth of a human's life and the question of whether resolution can be found in death and suicide through the use of tragic but open endings. So, both works, technique is tragic but open endings. Idea, sort of theme, concept that relates to the question, the worth of a human's life, and whether resolution can be found in death. They're the building blocks of those very effective topic sentences. That's level 7 stuff. Student got level 7. Really good. Okay. So that sort of brings us more or less to the conclusion of paper 2. What it is, how we plan for it, how we revise for it, and what we should practice in terms of our writing. And I know I've concentrated more on the first sentences of each paragraph rather than how do I quote, how do I then deconstruct the quotation. My honest belief is, after years and years of doing this with students, if you get the topic sentence right, then you have every chance of being successful. If you get the topic sentence wrong, it doesn't matter how good the rest of it is, it's not going to do as well. Okay? If you work on practicing these topic sentences, then your responses will be suitably comparative and suitably focused on technique and meaning, content and form, which relates to those ideas. And they'll also be about 2 works, which is essential to the question. So as long as we prepare those, we practice those, we learn some quotations, and we make sure we learn the literary features, the techniques, then we don't need to rote learn essays. In fact, we shouldn't, of course. We just know that we go into that exam and we have to do 30 minutes of really good thinking and preparing before we start writing. And that's the key to success. Okay, so coming up next, we've talked about paper 1, we've talked about paper 2. Please do check out Sparkl's YouTube channel where you can find these podcasts. We are going to talk about the individual oral, the other main assessment component for all students, and how we connect those components together and how we are actually in some ways learning the same skills. So they're really, really crucial forthcoming components for this. But I hope that was helpful. I hope that gave you some great insights into how to be successful in paper 2. I do think it's a great assessment, and I also think it's a great chance to do well. It's worth 25% of your final marks, and as you're preparing for it, and as teachers you're preparing your students for it, this is a real opportunity to teach those works in a way that can be successful in the exam, and students really can learn them and prepare for it. So it's a great opportunity. I wish you every luck and success with that. Thank you very much.